Hello, everyone, and welcome to Piloting the Future, a podcast brought to you by Innovation Force, EE Online, and the Climate Champions. Here on Piloting the Future, we're going deep with the leaders, innovators, and forward thinkers responsible not just for imagining where our power future is headed, but they're helping to build it day by day. In each episode, we go beyond the headlines to hear from the industry insiders and bold game-changing innovators to separate the hype from reality. So, Lee, we are back with a very important topic today. I am so excited to see you.
I'm excited to see you too. It's been a while.
I know, it's been a while. We've been busy, but it's going to be even busier because next week we have the Z Prime ETS Hack the Planet conference coming up. So we're going to be talking all about the intersection of data centers and utilities. We're going to talk about all this crazy load growth, how to find capacity, and do all this DER interconnection that we need to find. I think I was reading from Morgan Stanley, 49 gigawatts of missing power that we're going to need by 2028.
Well, I have been facilitating meetings for the Department of Energy with the national labs. It's their Voices of Experience series, and it's on data centers. So I'm facilitating a whole bunch of those. And just today, we did one earlier this morning.
What can you tell us about them? I know a lot of people are very curious, Lee.
It's pretty exciting. There are utilities seeing doubling, tripling, quadrupling of their load in just a few years.
Like 24 months.
They are trying to figure out how to deal with basically creating whole new utilities almost, without impacting their current customers, making sure that money is paid by who should pay it, making sure that they're not left with stranded assets, figuring out how they can even do it physically with any assets. So very interesting conversations we're having.
And that is so appropriate for our guest today. I'm really excited. The guest today that we have will be helping us unpack some of these load planning and forecasting issues, especially when it comes to all this growth coming from data centers. And what challenge that we just dropped with the Association of Edison Eliminating was basically this challenge around nonlinear loads. What I mean by that is basically load growth that is no longer gradual or easy to extrapolate because it's being reshaped by data centers, the electrification of everything, and shifting local load patterns that's making planning much more dynamic. And I think the key word here of the understatement of the year is going to be making everything more uncertain.
We're used to having interconnect queues with generation that wants to come online. Now we have queues of load queues, so that it can be managed effectively. It's just, who would have thought it years ago?
I was going to say, before we jump in, I wanted to ask you, did you predict this when you were back at San Diego Gas and Electric? Could you have seen this coming? Did you anything equivalent that you might want to share with us?
No, we were looking at electric vehicle growth and comparing that to the growth of refrigeration and color TVs, and we were ready for it. We were ready for EV growth. To some extent, commercial EV growth with trucks were going to be a challenge for a lot of utilities, but nothing like we're seeing with the data centers. They came quickly, they came hard. It's a very interesting challenge for utilities and for the data centers themselves.
Well, everybody, fasten your seatbelts. It's time to learn about the next generation of data-driven planning tools that is going to help your utilities manage risk, improve investment timing, and give regulators a clearer basis for approving solutions that are both reliable and cost-effective. With our guests from envelio and Integral Analytics.
We have Luigi Montana, CEO of envelio US, and we have Scott Smith, CEO of Integral Analytics. Very excited to have you on the show.
Welcome to Piloting the Future. We have a powerhouse lineup today to talk about this important topic.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Kim.
In the InnovationWorks platform, we help utilities guide their innovation efforts by answering a few key questions to get their flight plan started. And we thought we could could start out by getting some of the basics from you so people can follow along in Innovation Works and kind of see how it all fits together. This should make it easier for our utility colleagues that are in the platform to create their own use cases. So these are the types of questions that we need for the tool, and they're perfect to ask you here on the podcast right now. If you can each tell us a little bit more about your companies, what's the big idea that got you started?
We are envelio. So we are a software company building technology for utilities. We've been doing that for a couple of years now. So started in 2017, operate now across the US and Europe with more than 90 productive customers, ranging from IOUs to smaller co-ops, from rural utilities to also in more dense areas. And basically why we built the intelligent grid platform, which is our product, is a lot of years ago. And you're talking kind of about the pace of change that we're seeing in the industry right now. But already a lot of years ago, we noticed, okay, there is this change coming on the generation side, but also on the load side if we look at electrification. And we saw that the distribution grid is the most undervalued asset in the energy system. So we see utilities sitting on capacity that they cannot realize, unlock with their existing tools. And if you think about it, I think roughly more than 60% of electricity in the US move through the distribution system. And then you have all of these assets, solar, storage, residential loads, commercial loads, and they can move a lot. So they can matter a lot if they're used correctly. And this is kind of, let's say, what we're doing with our product, with our technology, unlock the distribution system as an asset in the energy system and help utilities do that. The reason we built the product in the way we did, and we started early on, is that we saw that when we talk about these things, data is oftentimes a bottleneck. It's either missing or it's siloed. So it's sitting across different systems, different teams, and you cannot make critical decisions in your system if you have 8 months old data or if you have only half the information you need. What we worked on is kind of we put all of these things together and we created a digital twin of the distribution grid. And on top of that digital twin, we then offer solutions ranging from interconnection to planning and operations. And what I mean by digital twin, because I think digital twin is also a term that is used a lot, it's not just a representation of your system, but it's a computable model, physics-based model that can really simulate and operate the system. And so you have this one digital twin, again, ranging interconnection, planning, operations, because the problems are not separate. The first customer we actually then won for the intelligent grid platform was many years ago. It was a distribution utility in Europe serving, I think, more than 4.5 million customers. So it was not an easy first customer. And we kind of worked on deploying this digital twin in their environment. And the first time they saw sort of this model holistically running calculations across all of their systems, I think this was kind of groundbreaking. They didn't even, I think, believe their eyes in the beginning. And that was the signal early on, okay, we're on the right thing. We need to keep doing that.
That's great. Scott, can you talk about this?
Yeah, we've been chipping away at our use case since 2005, coming out of the deregulation era where we tried to sharpen our pencil on rates and pricing and taking the supply side and the transmission more and more into account. We wanted to extend the horizon of planning. Similar to Luigi's story, there is data was always a bottleneck, but also future data, trying to simulate what could happen. And none of us anticipated some of these things. And we're trying to now understand what we don't see that's going to come in 5 years now that we see data centers. But in order to create those future data sets, we had to get back down to the fundamentals of the causal nature. Why do things grow, or where do they exist and where do they show up before the when? So we've been trying to find the where before the when with enough lead time to let the distribution and transmission planners come up with good solutions. There's a lot of economics. There's a lot of cost benefit analysis. There's a lot of, similar on the supply side where they have capacity expansion models and production cost models and resource adequacy models. On the distribution side, the data problem is so large. And as Luigi mentioned, to be able to simulate all the distribution networks is such a large task that we've had to break up the problem similar on the distribution side as they did on supply. So where you have long-term capacity expansion, we have a tool called LoadSeer, where it's trying to go out 20 years and trying to capture the causal nature of growth. And then we have more near-term, midterm models that are helping do more dispatching of assets in a planning capacity. And then the real time, where do you put load control can improve your forecast accuracy. You could implement enough load control, your forecast error goes down to zero. There's this need to create data and also to create future versions of the data. So we've focused a lot on our LoadSphere platform that creates these future scenarios. In order to do that, we focus on how the reasons in the drivers for growth have changed. And whereas you used to locate near your job, and the job was in the manufacturing plant, and then you have a bunch of residents and workers that worked at the factory, and then you have schools and stores that come and locate near the workers, and the loads would not change where they were. Now, if you had a hot water heater in a colonial home, the hot water heater didn't move and the home didn't move. But now we have robots and EVs and things that are moving on top of data center growth that's hitting the system. So we're already trying to solve problems without data centers. And then you have this new geography, which is a little bit more of a hopeful geography of, the where and the whys are changing. The causal nature of where things show up are changing. You may have a mountain town that has population growth because they can get internet from the orbit and they can work from home. And you can also have distributed energy and the currency of the electrons changing where you can produce 3D printed objects and have them delivered via drones. So the way that towns and societies have developed and where and why is changing, in addition to this massive hit to the transmission system with these data centers. Is a lifetime of work for us to do. I'm hopeful that we can also focus on the discipline of planning, not just the tools. We sometimes get caught up in the tools, and I have to remind myself and others that there's best practices and things. And I appreciate the podcast, because the more we can share, the better we'll all be.
COVID definitely shifted where people work from, for example, but it seemed like a big deal at the time. It was, and it is, but the amount of change in where energy is being generated and where it's being used is just incredible what's going on right now. And now we have AI, not only the data center side, but are people going to have jobs? And if they do have jobs, are they going to be going into a common place? Or are they going to be working from home even more? Or are they going to be moving because it'll be less important where you live and you can go live somewhere because it's a great place to live instead of it's near a job? There's a lot going on.
I hadn't necessarily thought of it until now. Yeah, if let's say that people that live in vans, or that COVID sparked that market for living in vans. If you had a sustainable battery charged EV van that you could live in and work in, and it drove you around and charged where the power was cheap and went and got charged where the solar power is available, do you have an address?
And do you need an address?
We used to, in long-term forecasting, you wouldn't want to double count because the loads couldn't show up in two places. But now they are showing up to places.
It's all very interesting. Can you talk about the key challenge that you solve in terms of how the industry meets it today and how you see the industry meeting it using your technology?
Lee, when you talked before about kind of the load, is it 2x, 3x, 4x? And I think we're getting so used to these numbers that we sometimes tend to forget that if it's 2x or 3x makes a hell lot of a difference. So it's for utility, it's really different. So like we have the load growth on one side, but then also a lot of volatility that they kind of need to handle. And with that, we also have then an environment where utility investments are being scrutinized under more scrutiny than ever because affordability is a topic. We see, for instance, New Jersey announcing an affordability crisis, or New York requiring proactive planning. And I think regulators asking for deferral of investments almost across the country. So how can we kind of, let's say, meet load growth while not overbuilding or being efficient about how we build out the system? And one important piece of the answer here is utilization, getting more out of what is already built. And if you think that the distribution grid to date is utilized by 40 or 50%, we see that there's the biggest lever for this. And the biggest lever is flexibility. So in a way, flexibility is affordability. And you can see how this complexity kind of comes to life. So planners, system planners that are used to work on the problems of the next 10 or 20 years are now being pulled into the next 10 10 or 20 months because kind of, let's say, utilities are trying to meet this complexity. This is kind of what we address with our technology is utilities typically, they know what to do. I mean, there are a lot of smart planners that work at utilities and we are allowed to work with them every day. We give them the time back to actually work on these problems, but also the tools they need to actually solve them. Because today, and to the second part of your question, Lee, I think most utilities still come from an area of flat load, right? So the grid system is planned for the worst day assumption. So basically I take the worst moment in the system that I will have throughout the year, and then I plan for that peak. And I add transformers, poles, wires, and I'm done. And that model doesn't work anymore. This model becomes really expensive if it's not addressed. So if you want to have a system that is more flexible, that is more utilized, you need to address this risk of something that is not manageable by manually anymore or also with the current tools. So utility must show that they're using what they have efficiently.
We've created some of the old traditional methods and that we were also replacing. We've experienced in our demand side management, program planning, and distribution capacity planning use cases, the traditional approach where a good planner with a spreadsheet is better than a great planner with a bad tool and bad data. And we've seen a lot of really good practices come out of the peak-driven worst case planning when you have a strong workforce of seasoned engineers that know the system, that have a good intuition. So with the retiring workforce and with more of the engineers and EEs coming out of school going to consumer electronics and doing all sorts of cool things that are not the utility power systems engineering track, we're finding that as the systems are becoming more complicated and more complex, even if they were able to get away with planning with the older traditional tools and intuitions, that intuition is leaving and retiring. There's a convergence of that. So our approach is to try to identify ways of keeping that knowledge around and build databases and keeping track of the local knowledge. It also happens when you have utilities that are aggregates of lots of smaller munis and co-ops over time. Sometimes you can lose that local knowledge. And I think that getting back to very localized planning and understanding each substation and if it's being utilized, what the potential benefits can be. It doesn't always feel comfortable for the utility to be prescriptive over where ought things go, because it feels like we should just let the markets do and let people buy land and build businesses. But there's going to be a need to have a little bit more of that affordability and where ought things happen. Urban, subsidized rural with these postage stamp rates that are flat traditionally because there's a bargain there between farmers feeding cities. And that is all up in the air. And I think that the need for us to calculate the long-term costs and include them in these planning decisions and get the engineers to help convert that plan into dollars is important, which you have to do utilization analysis to do that, to calculate ROIs, right? You can't just do the worst case peak. And so looking at the total energy and the load durations at scale across all the assets is the way that you have to start to prioritize, because you could do demand response or battery storage in an area that has a problem for a small window of time. That will not work for other areas. And so you kind of get a twofer when you get into the utilization and you start getting more granular. You start to open up this analysis that then gets back to the dollars that well-intended politicians need to know, but they don't always have access to enough information on what this cost would be.
And one more question before we get into solutions, and that is, if not addressed, what is the risk here?
There's many risks. At some point, also, as Scott is saying, like there's complexity everywhere, right? So like everything is becoming more complex. And then also, as also Scott said, like we have engineers as this resource that is becoming more scarce. So kind of the experts go into retirement. So you need to come up with a system that if you just keep like doing it the same way, there's either you slow down growth because you will not be able to integrate more capacity, so more loads and more generators into the system. So either the utility becomes the bottleneck, and we see with data data centers, what is the consequence of that? They just start buying airplane turbines and run the generation with that. And I don't think that this is like a good overall system solution. So you can either become the bottleneck or you run into bottlenecks of the system will become really expensive to operate because you need a lot of poles, wires, and transformers, or you kind of risk the reliability of the system. So I think there's like many risks that should show that we need a new approach to kind of how we plan the system to make sure that we don't run into any of these risks that I think ultimately all are something that we don't want to happen.
The assessments that are step function changes in the rates we pay because we didn't anticipate or couldn't smooth that out would be probably hit low income harder than others. Obviously, you could see some futures where there are market solutions for that are not good, that worst case, you have people that have the resources defect from the grid. They don't need the grid because they can't afford that. And then you'll have some that can't afford the new rates. And so they also kind of have a de facto drop off. They're not necessarily cut off, but they can't afford it. So then somebody will provide them a little battery system to charge their phones. And that's not equitable in my personal opinion. I worry that like you'll reach some equilibrium that is not beneficial to anyone and you don't kind of like build and grow out of it. It's similar to the parallel conversation in AI that like to make it a positive impact, you have to innovate and come up with good solutions. There's a lot of opportunities there. A good example we just saw was yesterday, Luigi, you may have seen this, is the GitHub individual accounts they're no longer signing up new individual GitHub subscriptions because the compute of all the agentic workflows is eating up all the capacity. And so they stop a service or they stop an option for people to add on. That's not of much consequence right now, but I could see this happening in small ways and creating unforeseen risks.
It's difficult to be proactive, but this is an area that we just have to figure out how to do it and have to change. I know we want to talk about solutions, so now is the time. Can you dig into your solutions deeply and also try to frame it around how it maps to the challenges we've been talking about?
So we wouldn't be here if we wouldn't also have a solution that we bring. And I think it's important to talk about solutions because I think also for the utility, it's a time where they're seeing, okay, we need to act. Ultimately, I think we circle around this topic of how can we increase utilization to kind of reduce the need for more system upgrades, this to cope with kind of the volatility and the load growth that we're seeing. The approach we're taking with our technology is, again, like coming back to the digital twin. So you have this live computable model of your grid that connects all different layers. And by connecting different layers, being like your planning processes, operations, AMI data, you kind of can unlock more intelligent and by that unlock flexibility. When we talk about what do you need to plan for a flexible system, the core thing is kind of moving from this worst case scenario to a time series based approach and planning. So basically, I don't buy a 10-bedroom house because I have the family coming over once a year. I'd rather say like you come this in January and you come in April. So basically, you need to be aware when what happens in your system. So model every hour of the year so you can and then enable capability then to steer also loads and generators so that you always can have lower capacity and increase the utilization across the year. And we do this by kind of enabling this time series based planning and time series based operations by combining data and putting intelligence on that to also like show you how this works in practice. We have a system planning solutions that leverages the digital twin and a machine learning algorithm. And what this machine learning algorithm does, it takes a lot of forecasts. And this is actually where also we work together with Scott and his team. And then once it has this forecast, it sees, okay, what is the impact of this forecast on my system? And then it runs millions and millions of power flow simulations. So basically simulating the system and tries to find the best portfolio mix of traditional upgrades and flexibility solutions. In the end, it assesses thousands of different scenarios. And this is something that cannot be done manually with existing tools. Even if we would have more people, this is not something you could solve, but which you need to do to really have robust results that you will trust to kind of, let's say, operate your system and kind of let go of that capacity that you typically reserve for the worst case days. So basically, I think this is a good example showing kind of how technology can really help you to just go into that time series based planning approach to unlock flexibility.
The systems like the one Luigi has built with his team are very data hungry. And when you need the time series input across the entire year, across different weather conditions, across different day types and calendar and business cycles, they rely on tools like ours. And so what we're providing is a time series forecast that also has some of the payback and the economic analysis that's required for rate making and the different benefit cost ratio tests that regulators are looking at. Our secret sauce is our grit to take that out 20 years in multiple scenarios and then feed it in to improve the inputs into the power flow simulations. It's a very complementary solution to the power flow software because when we go out really far in time and space, and we simulate multiple scenarios to see if your grid solution and your $1 billion you're going to spend covers all 5 scenarios. It's hard to focus on the engineering physics model of the grid simultaneously to the geospatial time series economic simulation model that we have to create those scenarios. So we run a kind of a light long-term capacity and capital plan over these long-term and then format our data to go into a more rigorous physics-based model like a power flow system that Luigi has. And that long-term need does have to be rooted in an operational understanding of the system. And so if you can have load control that levelizes load or smart breakers or managed EV charging, that has to come back into our system. So we have interfaces that also take operational information, or we take the DERM systems or the dispatching systems and we turn them into long-term planning simulation modules so that we can build another kind of dimension of scenarios out long-term, which is like, okay, if you have the operational control that Luigi's tool or these other DERMS tools that need to implement and actually approve that is possible and within the tolerance of reliable planning, how would that impact the long-term capital needs of the system? Because we come from a place of policy and of rate design originally, and we've tried to incorporate T&D, we are trying to work backwards from the 20-30 year models and then complement the rigorous power flow and engineering models that have the detailed assets.
So you hit on the fact that you complement each other, your products do. Can you talk about an example of where you've worked together and how you work together to pilot something like this or to install something like this?
We announced this partnership in the beginning of this year, so actually at DTEC in San Diego in February. And the way the integration works is basically you have, as also Scott said, like you have the rigorous forecasting of a number of scenarios of a number of years. And then kind of there's a seamless integration of this information into our tooling that can really do a detailed assessment of the impacts and also guide with kind of, let's say, finding this portfolio mix between flexibility and traditional upgrades. In a piloting stage, you can implement this in a rather simple way because kind of, let's say, these tools work standalone, but then also seamlessly integrate. So I would say the path towards trying something like this out and saying, okay, how does it work for me? How can I move to this more detailed and proactive planning mode? I would say it's pretty straightforward.
Specifically, we are working with a target study area and client on the East Coast of the US. And we have 2 or 3 others identified. The key is to find areas where you have real pressure from the electrification and not just the transmission data center push, but where we also have pressure on the grid for aging infrastructure, decarbonization, fuel switching. And so we have 2 target study areas that we're working on with Luigi's team and should be able to share more, towards the end of the year.
What results are you expecting that will show the benefits of the systems and of working together?
We are really driven by metrics when we kind of deploy our solution and also deploy together with partners, so also stand alone. Because I think ultimately we need to show value. So we need to show value to the utility and then ultimately also they need to show the value to the ratepayers and kind of that this benefits the system. And I think there's kind of different dimensions of value and metrics that our solution can provide. It starts like, for instance, if you look at interconnection, there it's how fast can you you process a study, even if you want to include flexibility, so talking about flexible interconnection loads or flexible interconnection for generation, and how can you increase completion rates across your queue? So basically reducing the number of speculative requests, having a queue that shows intent and not just noise. So kind of this is the first one, is speed to power. The second one is more efficiency. So obviously there is also an automation component of the technology. So I think we also always try to look at how many engineering hours do we save within your team. So these really smart people can work on actual problems and not on data and modeling and fixing stuff. So I think the second dimension is really efficiency. And if we really think about this utilization challenge that we have and that utilities needs to address, I would say maybe the most important metric is how much capacity were we able to unlock in the system without building anything new? Because this is basically free capacity that utility can use and can kind of use to accelerate economic development, accelerate interconnection, and reduce also costs to the ratepayer. So really like unlocking flexibility without construction, probably the most important metric we're looking at with our customers.
With ours, we're looking forward to one of the points Luigi made, which is seeing our engineering users and clients move on to solve the problems that they're worried about not having time to solve because they're bogged down in analysis, or that just single point analysis. Or when we run hourly detailed forecasts out 20, 30 years, it's really difficult to get all of those hours through a power flow simulation. And so we see the impact of not being able to marry our utilization and our load duration curves with the equivalent impact of the system at that granular level with that same hourly detail. I'm not sure, other than knowing how they get more information, and we're watching really smart engineers that are dedicated to making the grid more reliable, leverage that. I'm excited to see how we don't know what kind of interesting and cool engineering solutions they'll be able to justify or build, or switching patterns or new substations that they propose that were different than the proposals before. Both are probably really good ideas, but with more granular power flow simulation to combine the hourly load duration and production cost models that we were running, will be an amazing data set. I imagine that somebody's going to use AI to analyze it and help turn it into more information, because it's almost hard to predict how it's going to impact them.
Without a doubt, they will.
Now what we're going to talk about is a little bit of my favorite part of the workflow when we help companies think through their whole innovation process, is the day in the life feedback. And this is where all the valuable learnings usually sit. And I'm excited to speak to both of you about hearing some of the day in the life feedback from your deployments, because you both have mature solutions. Luigi, like you and I talk all the time about what was going on in Europe and the postcard of the future and what we can learn. And Scott, integral analytics has been around for a while. So you guys have a lot of great day in the life learnings that I think the rest can learn from, so that we can take your wisdom and hopefully move ideas to production faster. So my first question is really around the pain point of the user, not so much the problem you solve that you talked about with Lee, but when the users of your technology, you solve their pain point, what are they saying? Is it time saved? Is it the headache? The one less headache because of the complexity of all these simulations that you can run? That must be a relief off of people's shoulders to be able to have access to the power of that solution. Like, what is the pain that you alleviate for them?
In a really successful, positive way, in the day in the life of a user of ours, when we do our job well and when the system's working well, they are relieved and they are a little surprised that we have a model that anticipates things that they thought were going to happen or thought may happen, and we have it modeled out or detailed the same way they may have heard in their corporate strategy or forecaster or economist talk in a meeting. They feel relieved that someone got it on paper and that they don't have to justify or prove what the black box, or they don't need to justify that there is load growth. Because if someone tries to disprove or undermine the load assumptions that go into their plan, that undermines all of their plans. And so there's a sigh of relief when we're providing really rich, contextual, bottoms-up forecasted information. And we do love when they're like, hey, that's I told you so. That's what I was trying to model. Because in the near term, they want to see that our long-term models that go off on bookend journeys of robots also meet their needs in the near term that they can go share internal, and then their managers that like they feel more confident when they have to speak to stakeholders and not get accused of double counting or gold plating.
That's really at the core of it, I would say. Typically, we work with our users even after the deployment. We hear them on a regular basis and talk to them a lot because we're interested kind of what are you doing then with the tool. So I think hearing from our users, we're able to do something that we weren't able to do before. And now we can answer questions that we weren't able to answer before. And these questions can be getting drilled on a load plan or on future assumptions, as Scott was saying, or also, can you defer this investment here for 2 years? Or can you reduce your plan by X years? Or what happens if a new data center gets built in our territory? And because planners are typically the ones that have to deal with all of that, and typically they need to produce results fast because they are needed in important processes, stakeholders, executive, the board, and they need to be robust because these answers will be on paper. So I think if they tell us, okay, we can actually take this number or take this plan and put it in front of someone and it survives the scrutiny and we feel really good about this, and we're actually able to get to an answer, I think this is the best feedback that we like to hear from our users that we work with.
You get them over that trust hurdle. I've been saying the last couple of weeks, innovation is going at the speed of trust. And the combined solution that you both offer, it feels like not only can you answer the questions from the financial owner or the business owner, you go bottoms up and you can provide the data from the planning perspective as well and bring people together on the same page. But because you guys are walking the walk with all that data, you can earn trust quickly. What surprised you the most when your solution is being used? Is there any scenario, anything that you've run where that just completely shocked and surprised you the most?
I'm shocked at how many times we come up with wires and non-wires alternatives as not mutually exclusive. Some stakeholders don't believe it. It's like you need both. You have to upgrade the grid, and batteries can be good. I'm always shocked to see how novel it sounds to do both grid upgrades and DERs, which is kind of a different take on the question.
It's an and, not an or.
That's right. And I am always surprised also at how much our users appreciate us helping build that trust with stakeholders. I've never met an engineer that's trying to gold plate a system. It's actually counter to their, and I'm sure they are, and some are geared up and want to build more stuff because it's cool, but like part of their education and their practice is to not do that, to solve it, to know that we're providing relief or support to someone who's in that position. I never forget that. It's something that I didn't think would be so salient.
Luigi, anything that surprised you?
We work with almost 100 utilities. And I think the thing that surprised me personally is like, there's this view that the utility industry is slow and resists change and thinks the same way forever and doesn't want to be bothered. But actually, if you're in the industry and if you're also working with the utilities, you notice that that's not true at all. My biggest surprise is that utilities really want to change. And once you remove bottlenecks like the right data or like the right tools or the trust that they need, once you remove those bottlenecks, things can move pretty quickly. And we actually deployed first-of-a-kind solutions in months together with utilities in joint approaches, where we say this is rather like Silicon Valley speed than utility speed. Once you remove the bottlenecks, the utility industry is changing. That surprise makes me really optimistic about the challenges that we're facing as an industry, that we will be able to solve them.
That's awesome. One point I wanted to make is Luigi's making a very important point about how many times you saw first of its kind happening. And so just to reiterate to everybody out there that maybe is afraid to partner with your vendor, partner with your solution provider, partner with these new and amazing technologies that are coming out. When you partner with them, it's not first of a kind anymore. You guys have done this many, many times. It may be first of a kind at your utility, but you can have faith that this has happened many, many, many times. So it's not really first of a kind. It's leveraging the crowd wisdom of the many times that this has been deployed so it can work faster for you. And Lee, I think I'm going to turn it over to you for the hot seat.
First question. In 5 years, the biggest challenge for the grid will be?
Robots.
God, it is robots.
Give us a little bit more detail.
Oh,
We have 30 seconds.
rules and opportunities in solving and taking advantage of mobile loads that have never been mobile like this, and probably policing Bitcoin mining or something like that.
Luigi.
Yeah, I go with, I think, probably a resume of what we've been speaking. So I think in 5 years, there will be a lot of more assets in the system and relatively less capacity. So coordinating these millions of assets and the electrons that flows between them in a way that is, I want to say, like time aware and still reliable. I think this will be probably the big challenge in the next 5 years.
Okay, let's hear what the biggest challenge for the utilities specifically will be.
I think survival, branding, dealing with defection, dealing with adapting quickly. Not all of them are made to move quick, but some of them can. And I think that they have to attract good, talented graduates in the younger generation so that they can evolve.
I think I'll go with flexibility again, because in the end, like grid challenges are utility challenges. So I think in the next 5 years, what utilities will need to do is turn flexibility into a planning tool for utilities as well. Because right now, demand response, VPPs, and so on, they're all handled in different parts of the organization. But system planning is where the grid is designed and where like the billion-dollar decisions are being made. So flexibility must become a tool in system planning so that utilities can get ahead of this challenge instead of just reacting to it.
And there are more flexible loads than ever before. So there's an opportunity to manage them correctly.
Challenges are often also opportunities. So yeah, I would echo that.
A myth about load forecasting that you're going to bust for us right now.
That there is a true bottoms-up methodology. You have macro assumptions in order to enable bottoms-up methods, whether it's pricing or whether it's availability or whether it's political policy or even the highway system that allows areas to be connected and people to be mobile. But I always hear this, just use a bottoms-up. There is a bottoms-up method, and it's not true.
I hear you. Luigi.
I think the biggest myth is forecasting is not just about prediction, but about problem solving as much, because we talked about like a lot of data that we bring and a lot of capabilities, but in the end, forecasting is not just about running 100 scenarios of the future, but also testing 100 possible solutions to these scenarios. So better forecasts in the end come from better answers to the challenges. It's both of these sides of the equation if we want to have like good and robust forecasts.
Yeah, both sides are moving at the same time. Kim, you want to wrap it all up?
Yeah, I think we can bring this one in for a landing lead. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite.
So if you found this conversation helpful or inspiring, share your own bold prediction. Let us know on LinkedIn. Just tag Innovation Force and let us know what you thought of this episode, or feel free to invite someone or a company that you think is shaping the energy future. Let us know they might be the next guest on our podcast. And of course, be sure to check out envelio and Integral Analytics at their websites or in the Innovation Works Hangar, where multiple use cases from both of these solutions are being matched to real challenges that we have found in your integrated resource planning and distribution planning reports. So we know all you utilities out there are really struggling with this one. You can book a meeting with Integral Analytics or with envelio right from your Innovation Works profile. With that, Lee, I think we can fasten our seatbelts and take this in for a landing.
You better fasten your seatbelts. Things are moving and changing very fast.